Welcome to Project Command. I'm Captain Peter Eunice, and I'll be your host. On today's episode, we're joined by the Fire Chief for Smyrna, Georgia Fire Department, Chief Brian Marcos. In our conversation, we cover a wide range of subjects, from developing project management skills in your agency to leveraging technology to deliver better projects. But first, if you're enjoying this podcast, please consider sharing it with a friend or coworker who you think will appreciate it. Remember that every share helps more fire service professionals learn the skills and mindset to deliver better, stronger projects. Now, let's get to the episode. Today I'm joined by Chief Brian Marcos. Chief Marcos is a 20-year veteran of the fire service. He currently serves as the Fire Chief and Emergency Manager for the city of Smyrna, Georgia. He holds a Master's of Public Administration and attended the Harvard University National Preparedness Institute. He was recently named in the 50 most influential Latinos in Georgia. In addition to that, he's the author of several great articles, including one that I found very insightful called How to Transform Your Department with Project Management. Chief, I really appreciate you doing this. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, like I was saying in the intro, I really liked that article you wrote. And so just so everybody else understands, after I read that article, I actually reached out to Chief Marcos. And because, in addition to being a great article, it also happens to be one of the only articles that I could find on fire service specific project management. So anyways, thanks again for being here. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got started with project management.
Happy to do it. And yeah, so project management was something I kind of fell into. I didn't really have the words to really describe some of the frustrations that I was feeling along the way. And so, one of the things that I found in the fire service to be kind of an easy path forward for a lot of people is the discussion around leadership, right? A lot of people like to talk about leadership, the inspirational, side of what leadership is, and it's easy to find, it's easy to talk about, and just about anybody can discuss it. And so one day I was actually on a treadmill running, getting ready to present in Alabama at a conference, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, you know, why are we still discussing so many of the same challenges and the same issues? But there's an infinite amount of topic discussion on leadership. So obviously, it's not solving the challenge. And what I kind of landed on was is that we're missing kind of the sweat equity, the perspiration piece of leadership. And that really lends itself to process, right? It lends itself to managing the work appropriately. And it's unfortunately it's not the sexy part of leadership at times. And so it gets discarded. And it took me down this path of really evaluating the work that we have in front of us and how to approach it, especially in our department. And that's where I landed on this whole idea of project management and kind of looking at it more through the lens of maybe not as a project management expert, but more of, okay, how do I introduce some of these tools, some of the framework, so that our people really have a path forward and have words that they know the definitions to, and they can understand the expectations of the work that we're asking them to do. And so that's how this kind of developed over time, this project management approach that we have, this ecosystem within
Hmm.
our organizations with project management.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think so it's that, I've talked to a bunch of people about this in the fire service, and I think, one of the things that I hear a lot is we're gonna do the projects whether we use project management or not. It's not like we're not gonna roll out new equipment. It's not like we don't have to design new fire stations. The projects are there. And I think one of the things I really liked about the article that you wrote was the focus on processes. And I think that's one of the key elements that I have found the most valuable about project management is you want to not just have the sort of superstar dependent projects where, you get that, great battalion chief or captain or whomever, and they're going to run a great project, but it's not repeatable, and I think that's where the process piece comes in is developing those processes. So you have not just great one-off projects, but a repeatable process.
Absolutely. I mean, you're a great example of this. I mean, you're somebody that I'm confident that the leadership within your department can give you something, and you yourself with the skills, the talents, the abilities are gonna really dive in and solve those issues and those challenges. But what happens when Peter decides to take on the next challenge at a different place, or take the next career change that may come his way? There's a void. And so if you're really looking to set up a culture, a leadership culture, not just dependent on a leadership individual, you want to set up those processes for success. And the reality is what you do in by doing that is that you actually invite more participation, because projects can be intimidating.
Yeah.
Adding on additional work to someone's workload can be intimidating. And when you have a template or a process that someone can follow, instructions or an expectation that they can see a path forward for, you are inviting more people to participate, and you're inviting more people to do the work, because there's no dependent on the personality, right? There's not a
Hmm.
dependence on this extraordinary work ethic that maybe somebody has. There's a process to follow. There's a playbook that you can go through. And so rather than, like most departments, having 15, 20, 30 people that seem to be doing the majority of the work, you actually are saying, hey, there is a playbook, there is a template, there is a process that we can have you all join in and feel confident about.
Yeah. Very well said. And I think that's a pretty good segue. I want to talk about the article you wrote. And in particular, one of the things that jumped out to me was I think it's really cool the way you have essentially broken down the projects of your organization into four broad categories. And the reason that I think that that's so important is because, when I was first, new acting officer, first became a lieutenant, one of the things you hear a lot is, you build that slide deck of images, or that, the Rolodex of images. And, you go to a fire, and, no fire is the same, but you go and you see something and you're like, oh, well, I went to a fire that looked kind of like this. And so this is what we'll do, or this is how we'll get started. And I think most people in an organization don't get the chance to manage enough projects to build that project slide deck. But I think it's really interesting the way you broke it into those categories, because, I've seen that projects tend to fit into categories. And, what you use on one, a lot of times, if you kind of figure out where it fits and what kind of project this is, it can kind of give you an indication of where you need to go first, or what some of the challenges you're going to run into. So I was hoping you could kind of walk us through your four categories, which were sustaining, strategic, efficiency, and events.
Yeah, so by doing that, if you think about the ecosystem of the work that we have, especially in the fire service, you've got things that you're trying to sustain. And I think about those from capital projects to our budget process, things that we're trying to maintain, maintenance, and make sure that we still continue to have these things in play, right? You think about the thermal imaging cameras that you mentioned earlier to me offline. Was, those are things that we want to sustain. And
Yep.
so you that's one good example. The other is events. Our city right now is going through a significant economic development change, and our community development is definitely ramping up. And so what that's doing is causing more programming to take place within our city, which is then affecting us from an events scheduled perspective. So
Mhm.
how does that look? So one of the things that we can do is we can forecast so much of that. And by the way, just as another add-on to these projects, what's great about them is that with enough planning, you can really live your life and career and your workload in quadrant two, is what I say. When you think about the time matrix of not the urgent and important, but more of that not urgent and important quadrant.
Mhm.
And by doing that, like even our events, we're about to go on a retreat here in December as a leadership team. We're going to look at everything that we've got in 2026, both the city and the fire department. And we're going to spend time on discussing who owns that event, what elements do we need to consider, what's going to be the cost associated with it. We're going to answer several questions that are a part of what we call that project canvas, and make sure that there's clear understanding, expectations, and costs associated with the event. And that what that does is just set us up for success. Now, in terms of efficiencies, there could be some innovation that comes in play with that. And so when we're trying to innovate and improve existing processes or introduce a new process, that might require a different set of folks to be involved in that discussion. But that could be, again, that could be identified as an efficiency project.
Hmm.
So that's how we kind of look at those categories and determine, okay, if it fits in this space over here, that might have, the 5 or 6 redundant questions that you'd see in every project group, but it might have a unique lens that we look at it through because of the category that it falls in. So it just brings a little
Yeah.
clarity to the project.
Yeah. Well, I think very well said. One of the things I like about being able to kind of figure out the category of a project, it really helps you, in my experience, with figuring out who the stakeholders need to be. Like
Exactly.
if we have for example, we were talking about the thermal imaging cameras. With any equipment rollout, you can pretty well assume it's going to involve training. You're going to have to make sure do we need to do training on this? You're going to have to check in with safety, whoever handles your organizational safety, and there's going to be a communication element. So I think it really, having those categories, those broad categories, and stakeholders is just one example, but it kind of gets you started on the path. Like, this is who we need to talk to. This is what needs to get done. These are what some of the requirements are going to be. So, yeah.
Yeah, and one final point on that too, that when you break up the work into those categories, the projects, what it also allows you to do, and there are tools that you can use on Microsoft Planner when you
Mhm.
tag these projects specifically to these groups, is it lets you see, where's my organization spending its time?
Mm.
Is it on the sustainability? Is it on its efficiency? Is it on events? Like, where's the demand? And where am I spending my time? I think it's important as organizations, and especially the leadership, is to understand, where am I asking most of my team to be focused, and where are they working? Am I dispersing that workload appropriately? Is my strategy actually, connected to what it is that people are working on and spending
Mm.
time on? So I think that's another valuable piece.
Yeah. And we'll definitely talk about technology and how you all are leveraging that to do better projects. So that's a great point. So, with the article in mind, which, anyone listening to this, I really recommend reading that article. I really found it to be really insightful. And one more time, I just want to make sure everyone knows what it is. It's using project management to transform your department, Fire Rescue One. One of the things you talked about was the project canvas. And when you and I spoke, you sent me your project canvas, and one of the things that jumped out was I was just like, man, this thing is so simple. It's so basic. It's one page, and I think the reason that I really like that is when I first got my PMP certification, I was really excited about it. I was like, oh man, you know, I'm gonna I'm going to do all this crazy project documentation. I'll have, a 10-page scope document with risks and stakeholder tables, and then it turns out nobody wants to read that. Nobody wants to read 10 pages, and let
Right.
alone do 10 pages worth of work.
Yeah.
So, I think that's kind of the first thing that hit me about the project canvas was this is something people are actually going to do.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good point, is that a lot of times, especially if you're passionate about a particular topic, like you and I both are around project management, when we see all of the examples and the things that are available to us to manage those things, it's very easy for us to go, man, I get it, and this is great, and this is so useful. But when you're thinking about projects or even the work altogether, if you're really trying to sustain and do some excellent and incredible work within your organization, it's really about getting as many people to come alongside you as possible, right? And so what you're able to take in is not going to necessarily be the same as every other individual. So it has to be manageable. It has to be something that can be repeatable, something that people can understand at a basic level. And that's what the Project Canvas does. It simplifies it in a way that people can understand it, interpret it, and still get the desired outcome that you're after. So that was what attracted me to the simplicity of that Project Canvas. In fact, so much so that it's an integral part of our strategic plan now, and we can talk about that here shortly, about how we use it and integrate it into our critical task as an organization.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to talk about that. But before we do that, can you just for people listening, just talk us through what the project canvas looks like. What's on
Sure.
it? What kind of information is it looking to capture? When in a project would you do it? Is this at the very beginning, the middle? When would just give us the lowdown on the project canvas?
Yeah, so a project canvas is almost like the beginning stages of the ingredients to think about it like making something in the kitchen. These are the things that you need in order to successfully have that dish that you're looking for. And so it's definitely going to be on the front end of the project. You're gonna obviously understand the purpose of why you are doing this project. That's an element to this canvas. Who the sponsorship is, so who's accountable for the project, and then the stakeholders who will benefit from the and be affected by this project. Then you've got the deliverables, right? And then you've got the plan. How and when will this work and be carried out? You also have the investment. You also have to ask yourself, when, how much is this going to cost us? And then the benefit. You want to be clear about what the benefit of actually spending the time, the resources to get this accomplished. So it really is broken into three major pillars: the foundation, the people, and the creation in terms of the project canvas. But I have found it to be very, very useful in answering these handful of questions to really get clarity around the project and who owns it and who needs to be involved.
I like the ownership piece that you're talking about there. And that's something that I've talked about on this podcast quite a bit. I think, and I usually focus on the task level. Like if you're doing project work and you say, okay, we need to do a document review and flag any SOG that's going to be impacted by this project. And, Chris, you're in charge of it. Assigning that owner, just like, when we take the CPR class at the, very beginning of your training, they don't just say, hey, somebody get an AED, somebody call 911. They say, you get an IED and you call 911.
Yep.
And it's assigning that owner to work is so critical, just for getting it done. And so I think when zoom out a little bit and we talk about the project more broadly, talking about the ownership piece, who is going to own this thing is such a critical element of that.
It is. And the great thing about the canvas is it kind of creates this almost co-authorship, right? So rather than me saying, hey, you are going to own this, what you do is you identify that need, that project that needs to be done, and you have somewhat leadership typically, or maybe even it's coming grassroots. It's a grassroots, need that says, hey, we've got this thing we need. We identify it as a project. At that point, as you're developing the canvas, what I love about it is it's literally a co-authorship. And so rather than me telling you, hey, you need to buy in and take ownership of this,
Hmm.
which is more of me assigning you something, there's a little bit of skin in the game from all hands that are involved. It's like, you know what, we're in this together.
Hmm.
Um, one of the pieces that I like to have when it comes to a project is an advisor. So every project has an advisor, has somebody that would be what I call almost like an academic advisor
Hmm.
that helps you to kind of navigate your career path, right? When you think about in academics, you know, they're not necessarily taking your class for you. They're not, they don't know all the details of your class, but they say, hey, it looks like based off of what you're trying to get accomplished, this is kind of the path forward. And they kind of help you navigate that a little bit. And so for us, a part of our strategic plan in these canvases, we've identified advisors for every one of our objectives and projects.
Honestly, I genuinely love that. I think that that's such a great idea. We sort of, we're informally doing that. Sometimes we do that and I guess more of an informal way, but it's such a valuable asset to have somebody on a project who is just someone you can bounce ideas off of and say, hey, I'm kind of stuck. Like, what's the next step here? I have my scope. I know the work to do, but I'm not sure how to get to the next level. I think
Right.
that's what a valuable asset that is. That's really cool.
I think so. And it gives it more of a team dynamic. It lets
Hmm.
lets the individual owner of the project know, like, hey, you're not alone,
Yeah.
and you don't have to feel reluctant to go somewhere for assistance. You know that this is the person that you can go to for help that's been assigned to you as an advisor.
Not alone. Interesting. I think, from the outside looking in, I think it can be difficult for people to understand that projects are really stressful. When you're kind of coming up to administration, maybe you've been a lieutenant in the field or a captain in the field or a battalion chief or whatever, and now you're in administration and someone says, hey, you got this big project and it's got a huge budget and, the tight deadline, good luck. And I
Yeah.
think, firefighters, we think, correctly so, hey, we go into fires, we do all this, scary, dangerous stuff. How hard could a project be? And it's just a different kind of stress. So I think having that, you're not alone feeling, you got someone you can bounce ideas off of. I think that's really valuable. I think I'm gonna try to incorporate that in some of my projects.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. And it is, these are skills that can be taught because, one of the things that I found that also kind of encouraged me to go towards project management and introduce that into our department was we'd have people trying to do good things and want to help and would be so they'd be in left field when they were supposed to be in right field with some of our efforts,
Hmm.
that it was frustrating for them when we would say, "Oh, we don't have the money," or that's not actually a priority, or we would like you to do it this way, or half of what you've proposed makes sense. And when you hear that and you've put your blood, sweat, toil, and tears into something, it can be very discouraging, right? It can be very frustrating. And a lot of times that's what's encountered in a lot of organizations is like, man, I'm being met with resistance or I'm being met with no's. But really, all that's happening is that there's a miscommunication on where to start to get clarity on what it is that's important to the organization. And once all that got flushed out, like you and I've talked about, there's a path for folks to understand what the process looks like to and not be met with resistance, but actually know exactly where you're supposed to be going and where you're headed.
Yeah. I want to ask one more question about the project canvas, and I have so many things I want to get to. I want to be mindful of your time. You've been gracious
Sure.
enough to give us your time here, so I want to be, mindful of that. But I got one more question I want to ask about the project canvas. So, let's say I work for your department and I have an idea, and I'm sure this is the right thing to do. Maybe it's a new. I went to a conference. I saw a piece of equipment. I think it's going to make a big difference on the fire ground, and I come to you and I say, Chief, we got to buy this thing. This is the next greatest thing. It rolls up the hose for us, whatever. What's that process look like?
Yeah, so I think in many ways, I want to say that credibility is big with us. So I don't want to give you a long answer, but it is, I got to lay the groundwork here. So
Sure, please do.
individual credibility is important to us, and we teach it right out of recruit school. And we talk about folks that as they're building their credibility and they're showing that they're able to execute on the very basic task, tactical level things that are going on a daily basis, that may not hit the trigger of a project, right? But it's just improving things that's within their area of influence and their area of reach. If they get into a situation where, say, they want to recommend something that is actually going to be departmental, it's going to have a departmental impact, then that likely hits a trigger. That hits a point where we are going to probably move that into a departmental or command staff discussion. That'll reach an agenda item on our command staff discussion because it's made its way up through the leadership. And those lines of communication have been strengthened over time, thank goodness. That's not always been the case,
Hmm.
but it has now. And a lot of times, if that recommendation is something that somebody also wants to own, then the process for actually developing that canvas, it can be accomplished at the lowest level. It doesn't have to always make it up to the chief or get signed off by me necessarily to say, hey, this thing that you want to get done, is going to get done. Now, if it reaches a dollar threshold that we have to discuss, or it's completely unique to the habits and behaviors we're used to, then yeah, then we might have further discussion. But in general, people have a very quick and easy way to make things better here, in my opinion. That if they see something, they don't necessarily have to go through all the rigors of doing the project canvas. Because right now, if a young man or a young woman came to me or came to one of our members and said, "Hey, I saw this thing at a conference and I want to bring it back." I'm 95% positive that it is tied into our strategic plan right now.
Hmm.
I have so much confidence that it does because there's so many areas that we touch on. I have 32 different objectives right now in our strategic plan. I have over 90 critical tasks that are in there. And so what I would probably say is that individual would be met with a leader that would say, "Hey, that's a great idea. In fact, let's give that to the small equipment committee
Hmm.
and let's see if that actually flushes out into a proposed project." So that's what I would probably
Hmm.
say would happen is that it would find its way to one of our established groups or committees or work groups.
Hmm.
And then if it made it, cut the mustard, if you will, at that point, then it would work its way into a project.
Yeah, just that solid, repeatable process. I like that.
That's right. Yep.
Well, I wanted to switch gears a little bit here, and I'm hoping you can tell me. I know you and I talked a little bit about this before we got started here. Some of the technology that your organization is using. I know you mentioned Microsoft. That's pretty prevalent in the fire service. I'm hoping you can tell me a little bit about how you're leveraging technology for your projects or just for general fire administration.
Sure. Yeah, one thing we've really enjoyed and we've been using is something called Project Planner. And so as of right now, I've got three different planners that I'm working off of as a fire chief. And it's really to help me have a snapshot of the work that's being done, what projects we have in play. And it kind of gives you a real-time sense of benchmarks that are being hit.
Mhm.
So in Microsoft Planner, our strategic plan has been completely uploaded into Project Planner.
Hmm.
And we are able to use a sequence of flagging and tagging those tiles, is what they call them. For each
Hmm.
each project has a tile. And what's great about it is that you can assign the individual that owns it, you can assign the advisor, and any communication that's happening within that tile is notifying through email those individuals that there's
Hmm.
been an update. You can close those tiles out and see all that's been closed out or all that is still open. There's several filtering options on there. So if you just want to see things that deal with sustainable projects or efficiency projects, you can just see those things as well. But again, what it's done for us is it's just allowed us to have almost what I call a shared consciousness within the department. So the leadership literally in real time can see where we're at with our progress,
Hmm.
and we can communicate and comment at any given point on any one of those projects. And so that's been great. Teams is another one that we use, which also interfaces with Microsoft Planner.
Hmm.
Um, but the way that we manage it, we assigned my EMA specialist who's on the planning team. He manages right now that those strategic plan
Hmm.
through the planner platform. And so we've had a number of orientations. We look at it like this. So goes for the first line, so goes the fire. We've all heard that, right?
Yep. Oh yeah.
And so
Words to live by.
that's right. And so we actually did an orientation, a one-on-one 15-minute orientation with every single individual that was going to own a critical task and set them up for what we hope is going to be success in how to deliver that information into Microsoft Planner.
Hmm.
And then from that point forward, their contact in terms of managing the project is going to be our strategic management team.
Yeah. I think you touched on a really important part of leveraging technology is you got to teach your people how to use it. If you're going to use Teams or Planner or whatever, it's a critical piece there to kind of give them that orientation, make them feel comfortable with it. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, and I would say too that it, we were looking for several tools, and I know that it can be daunting, it can be frustrating because there's so much available. You don't know what makes sense for you. It works
Hmm.
for someone else, but it doesn't work for you. I'd really or encourage your audience that it is a bit of an experiment and not to get frustrated, because something that works for us here in Smyrna may not necessarily work for you, but to continue to kind of say, hey, team, where do you think we're at? Do we want to start here with with this technology? Because you can certainly overwhelm a team if you're trying to jump into the deep end with some of this stuff. And so I'd say, do the whole crawl, walk, run
Hmm.
approach when it comes to using technology. Introduce it slowly, get people acclimated, but don't give up on it either.
Hmm.
Just keep trying and using it in different ways.
Nice. Well, I got one more question for you, Chief. And this is, I hear a lot of conversations about this in the fire service. I did an episode on it recently. What are your thoughts on AI in the fire service? Are you guys doing anything with AI or do you have plans to do anything with AI?
I tell you, I don't have a clear path forward for it, but I know it's coming. It's here. I think that the private sector certainly has some incredible things that they're doing with it, and I think that there's some departments out there that are tapping into it a little bit more than others. I would love to see us continue. I mean, we're using it in some ways through communication. You're seeing a lot of the um, email communication auto-populating, to where things are grammatically correct and you're communicating effectively, and all those things are great. But the data stuff is what I'm really interested in seeing
Yeah.
because um, I still think that fire departments, particularly us too, we're still a little bit behind. We haven't found something that is easy to use, can paint the picture that we need, and can access and output that information as quick as we need it to.
Hmm.
So that I think is definitely coming for sure, and we're definitely have our eye on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I think that, the piece of it that really is interesting to me, the things that AI is best at, and well, maybe not best at, but one of the things is the document generation. And I just see that as such a big force multiplier for the fire service. There's a lot of challenges, and whenever we're talking about report writing, we got maybe HIPAA information in there, patient identifying information. So there's a lot of obstacles to clear, but I think there's a lot of potential, over the next few years to really be a tremendous force multiplier for projects and just for generally for the fire service. So I'm very interested to see where that goes. But
Yeah, I mean, we've got so much data and so much information coming at us that it would be great to be able to paint the picture in such a way that the public could interpret it, and we could make that information very useful to a layman person. I know we've got like these heat maps, and
mhm,
we've got different types of incidents that we have that are consistent within a certain zone. But man, that's just barely scratching the surface. I mean, that kind of data
yeah,
is like, from 10 years ago stuff that we're using. There's so much more we could do with it and paint a much better picture and get granular with it as well if we needed to. That should be coming to us this quick. But unfortunately, it takes 4 hours for somebody to go and develop the report, pull it out, make it look. You got to go to three different areas to make it look the way you need it to.
mhm.
We can do better than that right now with what we have available for sure.
Chief Brian Marcos, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been a great conversation, and for everyone that really enjoyed this conversation, hopefully we'll have Chief Marcos on again. And if people want to hear more about, I mean, obviously I've talked a lot about the article, but if people want to hear more about the things that we talked about here, where can they go to find some of this stuff?
Yeah, a lot of what I put out there is usually through LinkedIn. And certainly, if anybody ever wants to shoot me an email, bmarcos@smyrnaga.gov. And there's a few articles out there. Performance evaluation processes is a big one for me. The Four Bugle Chief was a topic that what I was pretty passionate about. And then again, project management. So you can just look up some of these and probably find me.
And I can personally attest that if you send him that message, he will answer you. So thank you so much, Chief. This has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Project Command. And remember, if you have a question that you want us to answer or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. That's projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it either directly or on air in a future episode. This has been Project Command, bringing command level thinking to every project in the fire service.